Hello everybody, welcome back. Welcome to the last panel, to the last section of this event, after lunch part after meal, but I still hope that we will be able to wake up us, bring us back to the topic.
We'll be speaking in Slovenian, but I guess you will have a very good translation, so thank you very much.
So, the last section is intended to the topic of cohabitation between privacy and safety in future internet. My name is Benjamin Vezia, coming from the University of Primorska region. I am also a member of the Center for Safe Internet. In Slovenia, we try to raise the awareness and culture of the safe use of internet between young people and their parents. As already mentioned, topic of today of cohabitation of privacy and safety in future internet. I will try to introduce the topic with four guests. Andrea Beccati, he is director of the relationship with stakeholders in Europe. Domek Češnik, director of Žabica company. To my right, Mrs. Melita Krovačić, coordinator of the program for internet rights and rights of women. And Georgi Iopescu from the Association from Internet Technology from Romania. If you have any desire to intervene, question, comments, just wave your hand and we will give you the floor. Otherwise, let me begin with the first question. Perhaps I began in Slovenian, but Domen, can I switch to you? In section, we will discuss four things. First, safety, providing safety. Secondly, we will discuss influence of this safety and security, providing security to our privacy. And the third issue that we will deliberate are smart devices that allow us comfort of living. And at the end, we will try to sum up everything into the framework of regulation, new regulation that will be introduced on May 25, 2017. Domen, do you have any smart device that threatens your privacy seriously? Hello, can you hear me? Yes. Any one of us has such smart device. Any of us is driving smartphone around, and we are open through this phone everything. We have smart thermostat. We've discussed it before. For a long time, I've worked how I can turn on heating from my bed and aircon, and how can I do it, or buy something cheap and assemble it on my own. And then I decided on well-known producer that I know who they are. I know that they update, modernize this device, and I know who I should look for if something goes wrong. That's how I dealt this thought of wireless, plugging in, switching on and off. I cannot update it, modernize it regularly, so I decided on the provider. Georgi, when we discussed these issues at lunch, you mentioned one of smart devices that can importantly, actually, we can let them into our bedroom. And how, I'm not discussing smartphones, but regular appliances connected online, air conditionings, remote controls, any kind of such appliances. You've mentioned a story to me. You told me a story in connection to one of these devices. If you can tell it, share it with us.
I thought you wanted to start with the smartwatch, but you wanted to be brutal. Yeah, so I told him about a case from this year, March, I think. A vibrator Canadian maker was sued and had to pay 4 million Canadian dollars because their products were collecting sensitive data like temperature, intensity. The data collected went back to the producer, and the producer would use those information to were using them for marketing purposes, to offer other products to their customers. And there is another famous case, I think it's from 2 years ago, when a father found out that his daughter is pregnant with the use of an envelope that he received in the mail. It was an offer for some birth products. So the girl had ordered online condoms. I guess they didn't work, and the producer offered her some other products based on the personal details that he collected online. So yeah, of course, smart gadgets are all around us. Sometimes we don't even call them smart anymore. They are normal machines that we use in everyday life. Even the coffee maker can be smart, but we don't think about it as being smart. But it may be connected to wireless. Amazon Echo is a smart device, but it's just a small box that sits in a room and listens to all the conversations. About safety, I was thinking, because we are the last ones today, we listen to everybody, and I took some notes, and I will tell you some examples, especially from Romania. But about safety, people in Romania, when doing online shopping, they like to research a lot. I don't know if it's because they are educated to think about safety regarding gadgets, but it's because they have a limited budget and they want to use it as for the best in the best possible way. Safety for smart gadgets wasn't regulated until recently. Internet of Things wasn't an issue when talking about privacy until recently, but more and more things that we use around, I guess, will be regulated in the future.
Thank you. Andrea, how do I can respond to general flood of all these devices, gadgets that we get from lawnmowers, from remotes, robots that clean the apartment and send the provider of the appliances the situation, the measurements of your flat. That's one question. And secondly, how these devices and appliances are seen in the whole internet environment. And nonetheless, when will we run out of IP numbers for all these numbers that are flooding us actually today?
Apologies for not being able to go very far with my non-existent Slovenian. I can pick up some words here and there, but I won't try. So you put some very interesting questions, and also the comments that you made made me think a lot. So what is the role of ICANN into that? Well, our role actually it's an interesting one, and I'm not sure that I will be able to answer all your questions. What is the impact on that? But what we do basically is to provide the addressing system. Is like the phone book of the internet, and the phone book in this case works for us, for human. Because when we want to go to a website, we go there and we need to be able to type a URL, and then the machine will turn this URL into an IP address. But machines, they actually in this case are smarter than us. They don't need the translation between the letters and the numbers. They don't need the numbers, but they will use the same phone book. So for ICANN, machines and humans they have no much difference. Now, the question that you pointed out is what will happen with this explosion of machines that will be using this system. And one case that came to my mind was a case of a few months ago of attack, denial of service attack perpetrated through Internet of Things devices to the DNS, so to this addressing system. And you may have heard about it. It was called Mirai. And there was an attack done by hacking a very low or non-existent security features that baby cameras that you could buy for a few dollars, $20, $30 online on shops. And those are cameras that if you have a newborn, you'll put it on the bed and you keep always an eye on your baby. You can check on your mobile phone if the baby starts crying, maybe it will alert you. So someone found out that these devices had almost no security, and they could hack the firmware, so this piece of software that is embedded into the machine, and use those machines to basically relay denial of service attacks, and they were so successful that big part of the eastern coast of the US went actually down, and big services weren't available. Twitter was down for many hours, and that's, I think, just one hint on what could be the scale of cyber attacks, of the use of those devices in a world where the numbers are staggering. I mean, I read some estimates where 50 billion of objects will be connected to the internet. So for us, ICANN, as of now, there is not much difference. Maybe there is one difference, but it's only as of now because those devices, they don't make policies in ICANN. They're only devices. I wouldn't see an ICANN meeting where a fridge and a baby camera will come there and say, look, I think we need to wait and see what artificial intelligence will do in a few years, and maybe we'll have to have a constituency of those. But what we do, that's very important, it's clear here, is that we only manage this simple but yet essential addressing system. And the last point that you mentioned is the IP addresses, IPv4 addresses and IPv6 addresses. This is an issue that actually indeed has a relevance, and because those, just to be very short and very superficial in that, but every time that you connect to the internet, your device needs an IP number because it needs to be identified to that. And the version of IP numbers that we commonly use now run out. Physically, it's a limited number that you cannot have anymore. So the risk is that you won't be able to connect new devices to the internet. There is a new protocol called IP version 6, which allows a way larger numbers, and so it's not infinite. It's not such a thing as an infinite number. You will teach me, but it goes in very large numbers. But this is a voluntary adoption, and if not everybody passes to that, you see something that we wouldn't expect, but it's happening. You see secondary market of IPv4 addresses. So there are companies that are buying IP addresses and they're reselling them because there is a shortage. So that's just, thank you.
Hvala. Benjamin?
Hacking. There are instances that hacking is not needed. There is an instance, I know, of a HTTP server that pods on these devices that has burned in admin username and password. That's the way how the security is thought about. They don't think about that. That's the problem with those current IoT devices that are coming now, that security is not an issue.
I totally agree with that.
Perhaps before we continue with questions from the audience, we have another guest at the panel. As we mentioned, once we started to discuss IoT devices and users and mistakes about security, we are coming to users and their education. So Juanita, in what way you can see in your organization how you try to educate, train the users about smart use of smart devices? use of these appliances? Do you have any experience from this field, from educating?
Before all, thank you for inviting me. We as organization are dealing with end users. So they usually think the Internet of Things is such a cool thing. And everybody wants to have everything that's new. Even it's a smartwatch, smart TV, whatever. When they come to our trainings, they usually assume we do assessment. And we assume that they know a lot about the gadgets that they are using. Reality is totally different. They have no clue how internet works. They have no clue nothing what is going on behind their screen of the phone or of the computer. So we all here are gathered with a common theme. We know the internet governance is our core business, but that's the handful of people, and put it in the context of the country, the whole country. End users are not aware of the risks that they are facing each time that they are online. Very often you will hear people saying, "Oh, I should do my banking over in the coffee shop." And when I say, "No, you are not going to do that," they say, "Oh, you are too paranoid." So basically, we're dealing with changing the behavior, which is the difficult part of our work. We can give them tools, we can give them tricks, we can give them variety of manuals, but at the end, it's up to the users, are they going to adopt it or accept it? But unfortunately, a vast majority of the end users are not aware of the risks and possibilities of the technology.
Thank you. Is it working? Yes, thank you. We have one question here in the audience. Over here. Thank you. Okay. George Hunken. In English, so.
English, and I would like to have a direct discussion, not translated discussion. Let me show you, let me share with you my story, personal story. Now I'm building a house, right? And I'm looking for all these smart devices to put in my new house. And I wanted to buy a smart lock for the front door, right? It's very smart. And then you have this smart doorbell that is connected to the lock, and then you have this camera instead of this thing when you look through. And then your mother comes and wants to water the flowers, and then she rings, and you are in Japan, and you see your mother, and you can unlock remotely your door, and all is fine, everybody's happy. And then I'm reading through the frequently asked questions about this lock, and it says, in case that you lose the doorknob, the Bluetooth knob, or your phone with the certificate and application is without battery, find another phone, call this number, and our people, wherever they are, will be more than happy to unlock your house for you. Ouch. Ouch. All the alarms went on. Red lights, flags, everything. And then I started thinking, so like, wow, does this mean that this would be the same as if I build my house, put in the normal lock, put the key in the envelope, and send it to the random person around the world? Just have my lock, just have my key, please. Here is my key. So the problem of the privacy and the security is not just on each device how secure it is, or if it encrypts, or if it has admin username password on it. It's also where it is controlled from. Is the control, are you keeping the control under your control in your house, or do you let these devices to be controlled from the cloud, from somewhere, where you have no idea what's going on? So what if a hacker breaks into this cloud and unlocks 10,000 doors around the world? Would this be a wake-up call? Would it?
An interesting comment, definitely interesting deliberation, but here we also meet another view, another aspect when we discuss smart things. We buy them from some providers, from private sector. As soon as we include the state, that also want to see what we are doing, what is going on, things become more serious. Can you imagine that you have throughout your flat sensors, temperature sensors? And these sensors send to the state the temperature that you keep in the flat, and then they can tax you for your carbon footprint based on your heating. That means that the state can see how you live, how much you spend, and can, in a way, use this data for taxation. Any response to this view how a state can intervene into this or connect to this disclosure of private data, private lives, how they can get insight into your private life and use it, abuse it, possibly.
I'll jump on what I heard already about security and IoT, and you mentioned regulation. And well, I believe we should be careful on what we're asking for. The community is extremely divided about the fact on whether we should or not regulate some aspect of the Internet of Things. You know that someone like Bruce Schneier, if you're interested to know more, please check his name, is one of the promoter of hard regulation on the Internet of Things. But again, we should pay attention to this, because one of the caveats that I have, and I'd like to hear you guys about that, is we should not rush on the top of the iceberg, which is the device itself. We're talking about billions of devices. Does it mean that we should regulate billions of devices, from the simple chips to your computer? But also, when we talk about Internet of Things, we should not forget that this is an ecosystem. You got much more than the end device from the retailer. You got a platform, you got developers, you got an ISP, you got the cloud. So regulate just the top of the iceberg might just be missing something. So let's pay attention to what we ask. Thank you.
Well, I'm not a promoter of harsh regulation or extra regulation, but I just pointed out a thing that shows us that the world is constantly changing, and gadgets are of all kinds, and they do things that we did with our hands or other parts of the body, as I mentioned in the case before. But I think we should insist on education. And it's related to your case with the house and to what Valida said. She said that we are dealing with end users, and somebody has to tell those end users in a funny way, in an intelligent way, maybe a little targeted to the age groups, that they should do that or this. For example, you mentioned you shouldn't do banking in a cafe. But what if you are doing banking in a cafe connected to their public Wi-Fi network? Or what if you're connected to a Wi-Fi that has a similar name to the real Wi-Fi network? But that goes into hacking, let's say. What about telling people they should cover their webcam with a little sticker? Because nobody knew that they can be controlled remotely, even if we don't have an active application that uses it. And I promised you some examples. And coming back to the association, we started I started working more actively a few months ago, and we saw that we had a problem. Everybody thought that what we do is cool, and that the association itself is cool, but nobody knew in detail what we do and why was the association interested in this field. So we thought about creating some campaigns targeted to age groups to show them what they can do with simple tools doesn't take too much time and so on. So we started several campaigns. One of them is, we called it ApTI Privacy Tricks. And maybe I can show the example now with the webcam cover. You'll see what I'm talking about. It's not translated in English yet, but I think you'll get the picture.
This one? Which one?
Second tab. No, second tab.
And this one.
Pe stradă, la restaurant, la școală sau la birou, suntem mereu supravegheați în lumea de astăzi, indiferent dacă ne place sau nu. Ce putem face pentru a ne proteja mai bine viața privată atunci când folosim dispozitive digitale care pot înregistra imaginea? Webcam-ul calculatorului tău să fie activat de la distanță, fără ca tu să știi. Crezi că este un număr? Dacă și lui Mark Zuckerberg e teamă de cineva și dacă și Papa Francis își acoperă o semănă, înseamnă că e ceva necurat la mijloc. Există mai multe soluții pentru a-ți acoperi webcam-ul. Poți folosi webcam cover-uri internet. Există diverse forme și cu tot felul de design-uri. Unele sunt simple, altele sunt mai elaborate. Sau îți poți face singurul cover de webcam folosind materiale și instrumente pe care le găsești prin casă. Poți fi inventiv, poți juca un joc, totul ține doar din imaginația ta. Orice variantă ai adopta, acoperă webcam-ul atunci când îl folosești. Pentru că nu se știe niciodată.
So it's just a simple way of showing somebody how to do that, and well, they educated themselves about safety, let's say. We used some simple tools. We didn't pay too much. It's just some time that you have to invest.
Thank you. I have in thought now mostly the problem of when we are always forced to choose between two concepts. First one is easy to use, general application and use, and there is no guarantee that our privacy would be protected. Namely that the privacy with the view of providing safety, obviously we overlook privacy. Do you have any experience from this field? I have slightly more experience with end users, and I know why and how it happens. Because we have strict rules as far as exchange of data is concerned and so on. But you cannot see how many times we come to the market and they ask us, why do I have to send this from the right email? I am the general manager. I can do that. We have a lot of problems. I say, sorry, you can be general manager, CEO, or anything, but we need data for the authorization from the right address. And if you want to be a startup cool, you have to adapt to end users. And final users are the ones that there is the tendency between security and convenience for the client. And unfortunately, clients win because they are the one with the money. Yes, the majority of people like it. Cool, okay, I lose some privacy. Okay, I can call you and you manage it. Until something bad happens, this is cool, this is great, they like to use it. But once they are affected, then we will go to the producer and they will adapt the technology. That is what we need to block. Yes, and here we need regulation. Regulation is the only thing that can stop it. People will vote with their wallets, with their convenience. Can I intervene? Yes, I have a direct response. I believe here the problem is that people are not aware what they are buying. And I believe that we have to train people, tell them out loud clearly that one authorization, 2 or 3 should have very strong message to tell them, think wide, think what you connect to your internet, what do you open access to, who can manage your house. This should be a very strong message. Regulation cannot help this. Only educating people can help so that people understand what they are getting into. Perhaps another message that you mentioned before, Jan, that when we have 10,000, 100,000 locks unlocked at the same time, then regulator will respond and people will wake up. In mass affection of personal data from a few corporations or from few state networks, EU Commission did respond. And when we talk about general regulation on protection of personal data, is your opinion, as far as you dealt with this directive, like a person from economy, from ATM company, how this GDPR influences your business? Perhaps non-governmental sectors, NGOs, where do you manage how this adoption of this directive regulation after May 25, how will it influence your clients, your work, your startups, and so forth? Well, in Slovenia, we don't know exactly what would happen because the proposal, the draft, we got even recently. But my opinion is that Slovenians have selective legislation, and we will have to adapt slightly. A lot of GDPR things will cause the mindset change. We will still possibly respond after the introduction. That is what I feel, that specifically a lot of people would ignore it. The majority would still ignore it, will not care, will not be affected.
Actually, I agree very much with what you just said. I'm not an expert on regulation, and that's another that it fascinates me. But at the same time, I was thinking, my father is a very well-educated person, but he used to drive a Fiat 500 with no airbag and no seatbelts. And at one point, you need regulation that imposes to producers to put. And that's why when you now go and buy a car, you look if it has 4, 3, or 5 stars of NCAP, or it's a very safe car, or if it's a Chinese car. But it's an interesting balance here to strike here. But I think we left together, and what I heard is that the European Commission is actually, there is I think it's called IoT coalition, where they are trying to get a form of self-adoption regulation, where you have best practices and standards that come from the bottom up, which I think is an interesting approach. On the GDPR case and on how privacy and data protection are actually defining very much this era of the internet evolution, I totally agree. Actually, I'm thinking that what we saw 20, 25 years ago happening with the whole climate change, and suddenly we started seeing sustainable development becoming a major topic. You start seeing campaigns on fighting against greenhouse gases, and then you get logos of biological products and organic. I think we are seeing something like that with personal data and privacy. And it is becoming a topic that for those that have been doing internet discussion and the internet governance, we've been speaking about those things for long, but it felt like we were alone with that.
Yeah.
And now, early this morning, we heard about the Snowden revelation, and I think even there, we weren't in the same stage. I was reading that after the Snowden revelation, many people started using less of Facebook, not dropping out of Facebook, but not that much. They went back right after, and maybe the new generation will have a different approach on that, but definitely the regulation that is coming from the European Union, the GDPR, will give a substantial push on the global awareness, because it really goes across the scope. It doesn't go only for the big internet service providers, but it also touches upon the public administration, it touches upon the small and medium enterprises, touches upon every one of us that has a blog and host and does blog information about his friends, and it's a public blog. We are seeing how the internet touches on all aspects of our lives, but yet we are not having the respect and enforcement of principles that we have in our real life on the cyberspace, even if it's becoming even hard to define what is the cyberspace when you are a mobile phone which is 24/7 connected anyway. But we are getting there. Now, the impact that we'll have, we can spend some time on what we see the impact on ICANN, for instance, is still to be seen and to what extent. But definitely it's a shift, and we will see more of that coming. We heard this morning also in the previous panels mentioned about what Germany is doing, so national regulations. And I think there is even a race across different countries across the globe to see who can protect more of that, and then you see a fight from the businesses on how do they have to react on that, and probably one day we will see a fight among the businesses because it's a new market. I say, okay, I can give you this service, and I guarantee this service is secure. You have your own availability of your data sovereignty of these projects. We're not going to sell your data to do money out of that. Hopefully we'll see this just please.
On the other side, we have the United States. We are protecting our data, but the United States is selling them all over the place. We will see who will win. What will be the most profitable model, or the model who's going to survive? I believe the EU has a better, it's a better one, but at the end, the money will talk.
Perhaps if we have a listen to the perspective how GDPR, that actually is a EU product, can act outside of EU. Any opinion how it can have an effect outside of EU?
Really complicated country. I don't know that they are even aware of this regulation, because there was only one event done by Microsoft, and it had only one like. The post had only one like. So I'm not sure how it's going to work in Bosnia, but definitely something that at least civil society organizations will have to do to raise awareness about this, because it's about the users. It's about taking back control to users. Again, I will reiterate this, I don't know how many times. At the first panel, we were listening a lot about education. People need to know their right. People need to know what they are assigned. Nobody read terms of agreement of the Facebook, Instagram, or whatever. And even if they tried, they didn't understand because of that legal language. I tried to read it, and after the first paragraph, I forgot what I was reading. So, and you have 13-year-old students that are on the Facebook, on Instagram, they don't read, but yet they have rights. And who is going to teach them about their rights? Maybe their parents? I don't think so, because usually children know more than their parents. Usually parents say, I send them to school, so school will deal with that. And then school say, no, they're only here for 5 hours, you are supposed to deal with that. So it's a vicious circle. Nobody knows who is responsible for education of those kids. And then we all think that when we grow up, we know much more wrong. With so many trainings and participants that we had, sadly, teenage children knew more about the security and privacy than the adults. So I believe my country will be affected. And I think civil society will need to point that out. Guys, you need to collect yourself and start dealing, because you will collect the information from the citizens of the European Union, and now how you are going to deal with that.
Yeah, I can tell you that in Romania people are starting to speak about GDPR, but it's also a good market. There are already consultancy agencies that offer courses in GDPR. There are already specialists in GDPR that can be hired. So there is already a pool of data protection officers that will be compulsory depending on the size of the company and so on. So it's a good market. We don't know many things about GDPR. I'm not a specialist in regulation either, but I know that it will be, as usual, more difficult for small and medium companies to deal with that. It will be very easy for big companies who have a budget already allocated to GDPR, to courses, to training, to write long terms and conditions, because the terms and conditions now will be even longer, and so on. But everybody will be affected, yes, even a small blogger from a small country in the EU, even an NGO, everybody who will be collecting private data. And coming back a little to the previous issue, you said, I didn't write it down, but you said that sometimes we offer too much personal data when we want to use a service or a gadget. Because, for example, does a camera really need to know, well, yeah, from a certain point of view, the camera needs to know where I am so that it can tag my location, upload it automatically on Facebook, on Google Photos and so on. But there are small applications that already need to know about me, anything, just offer me a small thing like, I don't know, an alarm. For example, do you need, does the alarm needs to know where you are? Yeah, you will say yes, because it will change to the time zone where you are. So your usual alarm at 7 o'clock will update to the 7 o'clock of the other location. And I think it's time for another example from another campaign that the association did last year. It's a series of 10 videos, and Valida likes them and uses them. They are in Romanian and English, but translated with hard subtitles, let's say. I mean, they are adapted. You'll see what I mean. It's not subtitles. All the content is translated into English. It's a series of animation. I think we can.
If you agree, let me quickly, not to run out of time, if you agree, just to have a look at this video or add them to the report and look at them at the end. Is it okay? Finally, all these 10 videos. One thing that I was still thinking about, namely, I got a feeling that from individuals don't take our privacy as seriously, as precious as it actually is. We are not aware of the precious character in providing and protecting our privacy. How often did you get from the side of individual or from companies, do you get some requests, some questions to disclose certain IP numbers or disclose some service that to prevent something bad or to report something bad happened, some problems happened? Is this often that you get such reports from people and companies? And how frequently is state referring to you with requests on disclosure of certain IP numbers and addresses? For individuals, there is very few requests. We cannot provide anything about individuals, private citizens. From the site, from the state, there are some requests, and oftentimes they come like this, fishing for information. like everything comes through the legal service and all the communication is done with our legal service, and perhaps can you provide, we know we don't have reasons to do that, but please, 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 can you provide this for us? This is in the majority of cases. Very few. In 10 or 15 years we only had 2 court decisions to supply data. Otherwise there are requests, not. Andrea, how do countries or states approach ICANN when they want to enforce some exemptions in traffic, in disclosure of data, in anything that is not following well-established rules? How do you get requests from states in any information in these connections? Any requests for exemptions from the states, let's so call it?
Always the easy question, thank you. So there are 2 sides of that. There are one aspect I would like to touch upon is the impact of GDPR on ICANN. And on that, I think it's a very interesting and even challenging discussion on how regulations coming from one country, in this case from a group of countries, can actually apply to a technology, let's call it a technology like the internet, that doesn't really understand and knows border. That's something that I think we have to look into that, and we can see what is the ICANN role. The other one is the fact that since ICANN was created in 1998, but increasingly in the past years, we do receive regularly pressures, interest from governments, from law enforcement agencies to give them access to particular information, or give them access to, or allow them to control or shut down sites. And that flags a very interesting part, is that often, not always, but often, governments, very important countries, they have little to no understanding of how the internet works, and come to ICANN with the conviction that somehow we can have the control of kind of a kill switch and say, look, they come to us. I've actually assisted to meetings where ministers of very large countries would come to the boss of ICANN and say, look, this is a list of websites that promotes information against our constitution principles, and we want them to close them down. So you now go and close them down. When we tell them that we cannot, they're not happy. But with this particular case, I said, then how can I do that? This minister, I remember, he was quoting the fact that he wasn't happy with Twitter, and he wasn't happy with how some of his citizens were using Twitter. And so he asked us to close down the old Twitter. I said, I don't think we can do that. And they said, well, but when I send my diplomatic envoys to the Twitter headquarters in California, they don't let them in. So if I cannot speak with them, then someone, I can speak with you, and someone has the control, you have to intervene. So there is this bit, it's not small actually, it's this general lack of understanding of how the internet works that brings governments with very legitimate requests and very legitimate interest to come to the wrong conclusion and think they can do that. And that's something that we're trying to address, and there is a process in ICANN where, to go into the more complete case of the personal data, we are now, because there is not such a thing of the Security Council of the Internet, where governments get there and say, okay, this is something dangerous, we need to do something. There is no Iran deal on the internet. There is no how do we stop South Korea from throwing rockets on an internet space. So this is a whole entire new realm of cyber attacks, of use of personal data across a world that is completely borderless. So in our small environment in ICANN, we have this We call it Public Safety Working Group. We like to have acronyms, so we call it PSWG, because otherwise it's not fancy. But basically, we gather in the same room the law enforcement agencies, national and global, so Interpol, Europol, Francepol. We gather the governments that they actually have some serious concerns on public safety. We gather the internet actors. So in the case of the internet, ApTI.ro is the registering registers. When you go and sign up because you want to have your own website, you have to go and sign a contract with a company that sells you the domain, that sells you the hosting, and this company has a contract with ApTI.ro. So we are trying to create some practices where you can actually intervene and do something, but it's not one single actor. The funny, interesting thing of the internet is that you really need many people come together to have a small action. Now, the issue here is that the common understanding on what you can do, it gets lower and lower. So it's quite easy, even easy, it's a big word, to get common agreement on fighting child pornography online. And actually much of the work that this public safety working group is actually doing is that. But even in that, there is discussion, how do you find children, or what age you define a children. So even that's complicated, but it is a way, because the other way that we are seeing is the classic way of the stronger prevails. And sometimes when the stronger prevails and the younger, smaller people, they come to the one that maybe can do something, I think ApTI can do something. But unfortunately, it's not that by design. So the other point that I wanted to make is the impact on GDPR. And that's something that even myself and within ICANN we are trying to understand what is the impact. Because what we are seeing now is that we have basically contracts with companies that sell domain names. So when you register, you want to have your own name, you go to registry. And when you sign up for your own website, you want your domain name, they ask you who you are, where do you live, and they ask you your credit card number. And this data is available online. It's called WHOIS. I don't know if many of you tried that, but if you want to buy a website, if you're interested on who's behind a website, you go online and you just check WHOIS. Now, this is a very interesting database because it's a distributed database, meaning that all the different parts of the domain name space have a bit of information, and the access to this information is also very distributed. So suddenly now we have a regulation that sets up very specific requirements for who, how, and when someone can access data. And that applies to the 28 countries in the European Union, maybe 27 in 2 years, but now 28. Plus, it applies also to any European citizen that is actually using a service on the internet, which is either based in Europe or not. So you have an impact that goes well beyond the borders of the 27, 28 countries, and it goes into one of the core parts of the internet addressing system. So we are now trying to figure out what is the impact on that. The fear that we have is that the idea at the base, and as a European, I'm completely supportive of that. The implementation goes along the same line that I was telling before, that there is not a complete understanding of how the internet works. And so, when you combine these two things, you actually risk that you fragment the internet that we are seeing today. Because then, just to make a complete case, you will have ICANN that has around 190 different jurisdictions to deal with and contracts with those. and has to change all those contracts to comply with the regulation of 28 countries. Now, so you can do the math, 190 minus 28, so all the rest of the countries, they will come to us and say, hey, wait a minute, I also want to have this privacy and data protection regulation, and you also have to apply it to all your contracts. And maybe this country doesn't come from the same human rights-based point of view of the European Charter of Human Rights, but comes from the point of view that you need to control what your citizens say because you fear that the criticism can be dangerous for your own safety, your own government. Well, we have no jurisdiction in saying, look, we don't like your way of doing your legislation, so we won't implement it, but we like the one the Europeans are doing. That's something that we cannot do that. We have not decided to do that, and it's very hard goal to do that. So that's the situation where we are now. And we are seeing this thing coming. Well, it's 25th of May 2019. We are not clear yet of the impact that we have on the whole ecosystem because it's very difficult to have it. But we are seeing the risks of pushing something that has a very limited border and defined component on the internet. I mean, one of the things that makes me really laugh when I'm in Brussels is all the digital single market package and rhetorics about that. And to me, it's a contradiction in terms. You are looking at the internet and you're calling it the digital single market. Really, single and internet, digital market, those things already exist. There's the internet, the digital single market. I can go and buy stuff on Amazon from ApTI.ro. So we have these challenges of being able to foresee and to produce policies that really understands how the internet works. And if we don't close this gap, we risk big times. And I think we will see the same from the previous discussion we had with Internet of Things, and we had with regulation, and we have with standards. We go down to the same problem or issue here, or challenge, by let's say, of having to deal with a technology that really has nothing to do or resembles with any other technology for communication that we did so far. But we produce and push legislation on that as if this internet was, the old school copper telephone line or the railway network. And and it stops here. That's my railway network. That's Slovenia, and then there is that's it. So that's a few considerations to make things even easier.
Slovenia, we have a lot of issues that a lot of services are not available to us. So for us, the single digital market directive, it's a good thing. Let's say we don't get Spotify. We don't have it. Most of the people that live abroad have it. We don't, because we're a too small market. That's, as EU goes, this is for as small nations, it's a good thing. For you, as an Italian, as a huge nation, it doesn't bother you because you have everything, because it makes sense. As I said before, money talks. It's a lot of money to be made in Italy, in Slovenia. Those small numbers are not important.
Another view that I want to mention as the state, when the state wants to regulate individual areas, mostly things stack up when the state wants to change some things that are in connection to repression legislation, police law legislation, criminal law, and in those times when the state wants to enforce higher repression, higher level of repression. But on the other side, we had other stakeholders, economy and civil society, how we can respond to the appetites of the state when they want to be more repressive, when they want to access certain data that we feel that as citizens they shouldn't have access. Few years ago when they wanted to collect the information on your mobile phones, the whole connection database from your private phone line when you made a criminal offense. How we can, as civil society, NGOs, economy, can respond to such appetite, such attempts to entry our private sphere with the purpose of providing better security and safety and so forth. If you ask average citizens, they will say they don't care. This does not concern me. That's the final answer until they are individually affected. But then people shout. But it's up to us to raise the awareness and education of people. Perhaps this time you are not affected, but you might be affected in the future, or your neighbor can be affected. How we can how to convey this message to people that even if in this moment you are not affected and you don't feel this would be important for you personally, but perhaps it will affect you through the people that you know, the state and bigger companies, they will have appetites to get more and more access and intervention into your private sphere. But how to stop it? As Andrea said, everybody is discussing this new legislation. They have a lot of consultants and seen, but in EU there is no person who will be clear completely here what the effects will be, what the application will be, and what can happen, what will happen. Another question from the audience. More a comment than a question. How to prevent this? Namely, we all remember how the police wanted to legislate the access to install different worms or different programs that would follow people under suspicion of criminal act, how they would access their phone records, and they would threaten their privacy and other people's privacy. And when I asked them, what if antivirus programs would start detecting this? They said, oh no, we will make these antivirus programs. How can we talk to them? We started talking to them. We started explaining to the government, to the police, that this is disproportionate measure that cannot be technically implemented. There are no tools. There is no way we can make such a spy program at the relevant level. We started discussing the topic publicly, openly. Next case was when they, at I don't know what ministry, they wanted to charge the tax on internet. How did we react? Talking about that, educating them. We opened the discussion on mailing list in our webpage. We compiled a petition. We got signatures from our members, sent it to the ministry, to other communities. We connected them, Dusan as well, and we got the memo from the ministry back. Thank you for the information. After due diligence, we will remove tax on internet from the draft of the act. Soon, how did we react as the community? Educating, talking. That is why we need IGF community, technical communities, all other communities dealing with different areas of internet, different views, and it is important to be connected. On our own, we cannot be successful, but we have to talk, we have to discuss issues among ourselves and with authorities, of course.
For example, today I was expecting that a lot of people would mention the copyright reform that will affect us all. Because yes, it's absurd. Maybe it's because the legislator doesn't know how the internet works. Because maybe we will have a link tax. So every time we will make a link, we will have to pay a tax to that company. Every time we will upload content online, the content will have to be scanned automatically and removed if it violates if it's a copyright infringement, and that's censorship, that's dictatorship. So it affects us all. It may be because the legislator doesn't understand how the internet works, or it may have an economic agenda behind. And Andrea said, mentioned both causes. What can the civil society do? Yes, educate the people, but then the people should react. So those actions should go hand in hand. For example, the copyright reform is knocking on our doors. There are still some votes to be done in some commissions in the parliament, but who knows, maybe next year, starting in spring, we'll have to pay for our small personal blog, we'll have to pay every time we make a link to a news article. And this is how you don't create a digital single market. You create something else, and I named it. It's called censorship.
I would like to go back to what Jan said. And you gave me hope. We talked about that last night. In Bosnia, we failed to find the law that was ridiculous. Basically, one part of the country decided to impose the law where Facebook is a public space. Therefore, you cannot organize a protest on Facebook. If you do it, it's against the law. And nobody made a comment about that. Nobody did anything. Media was pretty silent. General public was not interested. I don't know why, because the Facebook is their life. So, I believe that there is possibility if we gather strong technical community, civil society, media, academia together and to fight these ridiculous laws that will happen in the future, because in my country we want to be a part of European Union, and very often we signed a lot of rubbish just to get there. So if we have a strong community within the country, maybe we will be able to fight censorship and dictatorship.
Thank you. Another view, let me point out another view. When we use internet, now in this community that we are part of, we can all use the internet. There is no obstacle to that. But when we meet different vulnerable groups or less educated groups or individuals, when children use internet, the youngest children from early age on, not to bypass the problems of the influence or abuse and misuse of women, hate talk, discussions about LGBT societies, communities. These are vulnerable groups of people who are not that protected, and we have to protect them further. I wonder, what is your view, how we can help this vulnerable group? One thing is education. Anything else? Any other measures that you use or actions that you use?
Mentioned, we are organizations that's fighting online violence against women and girls, and we start educating them since the age of 13. We are part of the IT Girls initiative started by UN agencies, and what's striking us is that very often they are not aware that they are in danger. They are not aware that they are facing online violence, online harassment. because it's normal, it's law, it's okay in that age to behave like that. So after our trainings, half of them accept that they have been victims of online violence. And very often when we confront them with the YouTube videos that created a lot of stir in our community, in our country, a lot of them just laughed at it. And many of those girls in the video tried to commit suicide a couple of times. And still those girls were laughing. They just don't understand that's not acceptable. And another issue is, okay, I will go give them a training, and what then? They are left alone. Will they adopt what I said? Will they use the tools that I gave them? Will they change their behavior? I don't know. So we need to change the approach when we educate them. It's not okay and enough just to have one lesson during the year. We have to go there all over again and to see if that's working. And it's not always with the children. In my country, at least they are protected with the law against the child pornography. But at the moment they are 18, we don't have a law that protects any other person from online violence. Okay, we have cyber law, but again, that's like money fraud and money theft, and credit card theft. But when you are facing the life threats, when you are a journalist who are facing the life threats all over again, there is no law that will protect you. So you are on your own. So who can help them? Yes, we can prevent in a way. We can give them tools. We can teach them how to change behavior. But very often when we talk about female journalists, they self-censorship them. They change their behavior. They stop using their profiles. They stop writing. They have to leave the country. We have so many recent cases in Bosnia that people had to leave the country because they were not able to cope with online violence and harassment. So this is a very emerging issue. And right now, I don't know final answer how to deal with that. But at the moment when I find the answer, luckily the violence will stop and I will be out of job.
Perhaps, since we still have some few minutes, if there are any questions, we will respond gladly. Otherwise, perhaps for the end of this panel, any idea from any of you, in your opinion, which one of the technologies in the next 5 years, by your opinion, and that the technology will be driven by some personal data, some big data, which technology will essentially shape the use of internet or our daily lives? Possibly if we are talking about the future of internet, how the safety and privacy will cohabitate in the future of internet. Which service, which technology, in your opinion, will have the most important influence on our life in 5 or 10 years' time, and will be driven from this pool of personal data that we gladly provide all over the place? Anyone dares to start?
I think it will be audio search, because we already stopped reading, so we don't use our eyes to read books, but to look at text, look at images. We stopped using one hand, and depends on which hand. We only use one hand and one thumb. And now we will start to use only our voice. And it's already starting. In fact, as you see, there are a lot of gadgets that are based on voice, and you can do search, shopping, anything you want, using only your voice.
I have to say, I'm freaking out. Really. Probably with the blink of an eye. You will know everything about me, so I'm pretty scared.
So kind of saying special glasses that I will be wearing.
In China, you can already pay with a smile.
No, thank you.
You will not need to think about anything. It's going to be done for you. Artificial intelligence is going to cook the lunch for you. It's going to know what you want to eat. It's going to know when you need to go to the toilet. That's what I'm afraid. Yeah, that my mind is not going to be so important, but my computer will decide what I need to do. That's a little bit Orwellian, but I think that this is the way we are going to it.
You know, I think it goes in the same line. I think what we are seeing with artificial intelligence is something that will really change our experience on the internet. I was thinking not just to connect two things, two experiences. Around 2005, 2006, Facebook started becoming very popular, and I have a younger brother who is exactly 10 years younger than me, and I'm not on Facebook. I was never on Facebook. And so one day he asked me, why you're not on Facebook? And I said, I don't think I need it. And he answered to me, well, how do you meet girls? I said, well, I think I go old school. I think I go out and clubs. And then just a few months ago I read a very interesting long article on the New Yorker about these chatbots. And basically these are artificial intelligence machines, and there is plenty of young Chinese. There is a shortage of girls apparently in China for several reasons. So they are in their late teens, early 20s, and they spend hours chatting about love, about life, with a bot, with a machine. And this article was fascinating because it will tell you these are people that they spend hours, they invest money on that, you know. And then I was linking that with what my brother was telling me 10 years ago, more or less. So that's something that really scares me, is that we are not seeing how much we are getting into a future that a few years ago was probably only science fiction almost, but it's actually happening, and it's happening in real time. And the interesting thing is that many of the creators of these new technologies, Elon Musk, for instance, the guy that is now almost everywhere, from space rockets to self-driving cars, he said himself, I'm very scared of artificial intelligence, very scared of that we are not even able to see how much this will impact our lives. And there was another article on The Guardian just a few days ago of people that they joined Silicon Valley startups in their early 20s, now they're 30, 35, and they regret what they invented. It's kind of a rootist approach almost. They said, well, we went too far. We opened up too much, we gave too much of our information, we took too much of our faith into this technology. And now they just, they step back, and many of them, they step back after they earn millions, so it's easier to step back in this case. But this is something that I think we are not yet seeing, and what we see so far, and that's kind of clear, but still not for everybody, is that the gap between how much we can even understand, and then from understand try to regulate or discern what is good, is bad, is getting bigger and bigger. You know, so it's interesting. Frederick, you mentioned this morning, one of the principles of the internet from the founding fathers is this permissionless innovation. But we are seeing that it's getting, way farther than what the founding fathers of the internet thought was, because at the beginning for them was having a machine talk with another machine, and everyone who wants can join that. Well, we came 25 years after, and we go in an environment where the permissionless innovation really goes into all aspects of our personal lives. You see now the old fancy thing is called biohacking. and how you can install chips in your body, how can you basically apply the same principles that you apply to hacking a software to how your organism work. And you have people, again, from Silicon Valley, because that's where they look, and they like to experiment. They feed themselves with hundreds of beats per day, and they're convinced they can live until 140 years. And they're already, there is this gap on what's happening right now. I mean, one of the common phrases that the future is here, but it's not evenly distributed. Well, I think it's now even more poignant and present now. So this is something that, in a way, it fascinates me, it scares me, and sometimes it makes me think back. And it was very cool when I used to go out, even without a mobile phone, and bump into a friend, and then randomly do something, or someone would come to my house and ring at the doorbell, and my mom would answer and say, "No, he cannot come play because he has to do homework." These things are not happening anymore. We are losing that. It's fine. It's okay. But there are some consequences on that, and we are not yet having this discussion broadly enough. And one of the spaces that we have to have this discussion is exactly this kind of forum, this internet governance forum, these places where you put together different parts of the society, but we want to see them scale up. I mean, I would like to see a discussion like this happening at a stadium level kind of thing, but we still go to the stadium to see soccer matches or rock stars, but not yet to have these discussions. So to close with very high hopes, I think the shift we have to do here is really on the governance side, and we still think that we are users of the internet, and it's fine to be users, and sometimes users becomes customer, but the internet actually enables you to be way more than user and customer. It enables you to be driver, and the technology allows you to do that. We are not taking that yet, and I don't know why, because we are collectively too lazy, we are collectively too taken by our daily lives, and we don't see that far, but we do have an opportunity here to change even the way we govern ourselves thanks to the internet. We are not seeing that. We go back into the same issues of, well, we need policies, we need regulation, we need GDPR, and then we see that these things, they run short even more and more. I conclude here, otherwise I can go till tomorrow. Thank you.
We have one question, yes, from the audience.
So thank you, Andrea. I believe the principles that you just talked about a few seconds, like permissionless innovation, are here to stay. It's just linked to the openness of the internet. So we have a good news. The internet is open, it means it's open to everybody. We have a bad news, the internet is open, it means it's open to everybody, including the bad guys. So it means that when we talk security, we should not forget another principle, and that is the internet is user-centric, which means that we need to offer users a known way to protect themselves. So this is one of the reasons why we keep repeating in the internet society that we need to promote encryption. That's another way to organize safety for people, and I prefer that someone else, like the government, would come up in the room and say, be safe, I take care of your security. I mean, that's a nightmare, I mean, someone coming in the room and I take care of your security. So yes, you're right, there is a shift in the way we need to address internet issues with always those elements which we call the DNA of the internet, the environments in mind. We need to find solutions in a systemic way. And this is why what you said again is right. The only way to find this is to avoid that there is someone suddenly saying, I got a central way to address this. And this is why we need to have those different people in the room coming up with different angles, the technical community, but also the academic civil society, etc. Thank you.
And now let me invite you, the three rapporteurs from the sessions. We will make a short summary of the day until We will report from all three individual sections, and later on we will have the less formal, the more social part of our day. So Peter, Marco, and myself, the three of you, we will make the short summary, and then we will meet you outside for refreshments and less formal discussion. Okay, there are very few of you left, but it will be quick and sweet, the conclusions from the whole three of us. Here we are. Yes. Okay, let's begin with short reports from the first section titled Neutral Internet, Open Technologies and Open Society. Okay, Open Technologies and Open Society. Okay, you can hear me, yes. It's working. Perfect. The first section discussed open technologies and open internet. The panelists mostly discussed 4 views of this issue. The need to have open and inclusive internet as a precondition for technological and economical progress. The required knowledge, how without knowledge we cannot have open technological platform and access to open platform. Mostly they discussed how regulation, if it is needed, and how shouldn't it affect the openness of internet. However, without regulation, there is no open internet. That was the dilemma of their discussion. And finally, we discussed safety and security with the purpose to preserve access to open and inclusive technology. At the end of the first section, we read the statements on the topics that participants supported fully. The second section was titled, Where is the line of freedom of speech? Where is the border of freedom of speech, and where a state can intervene into these liberties? The beginning of the discussion initiated by Ombudswoman. In her first statement was, we need freedom of speech with restrictions. Firstly, she said that we need freedom of speech, freedom of expression. That is what I liked. Her first message was, we do need freedom of expression. And then later on, the panelists tried to define hostile speech, specifically focused on a certain number of people, certain groups of people, and how we can restrict this freedom of speech with the purpose of protecting other vulnerable groups. We can limit freedom of speech to protect other liberties, other rights. And which are these rights? Protection of dignity, fight against discrimination, and some other similar features of hostile speech. It was interesting that panelists also mentioned that according to reports from the WebI that according to the number of reports, we have less hostile speech, but it's becoming more and more radical. It's using more and more radical forms. And the ombudsman woman mentioned that in the avalanche of different comments, we have a positive comment now and then, but it's been lost in the avalanche of hostility in different forms, in different comments. She was very decisive when she mentioned that the previous legislation in force until 2011, when a number of acts would be convicted, but now, due to new, more narrow definition of the hostile speech as a punishable act, a lot of convictions would no longer be assured. That represents state coming out of this field, and we can no longer be tolerant for intolerance. And thirdly, Ombudswoman mentioned the view of self-regulation. That is, in a way, introducing privatization of constitutional protection of human rights, privatizing the role of the state, self-regulation by media, self-regulation by social media, internet providers, and through the opinion of one of the participants, when the question of false news and how service providers should react to hostile speech, and perhaps for the end, we've heard about different mechanisms how we can fight hostile speech, and if the state is moving out, this can leave the door open. There is no longer any stick or a role model or a visible consequence what would happen to you if you apply hostile speech. The third section was titled Cohabitation of Privacy and Safety in the Future Internet. The discussion went through different areas. First, we discussed Internet of Things. Then we followed with the protection of privacy on internet and General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. And then we continued with protection against access of state to private and sensitive data. And then finally, we had a look at future technologies that would most influence our lives in the future. Throughout the discussion, we had a silver thread, namely education and raising awareness, that we have to teach users of internet, raise their awareness of all the threats, all the risks. We all have smart gadgets at our home. We have smart locks, smart meters throughout our homes, and all these gadgets are connected through Internet of Things. And what we is an important problem, important issue of protecting these gadgets, question of safety installed into these appliances. Uh, we mentioned hacks into cameras, that or babysitter cameras that caused the fall of servers in US. The main problem is that the producers of smart devices do not think how safety features would become integral part of their appliances. Another view is the view of users who are not aware of risks caused online and when using these smart devices and are not aware of how these devices are connected, how they can be affected from distance and so on. What are the risks and what we have to be careful of. The regulation of these appliances by the state is not needed at the level of individual appliance, but it is needed at the level of the whole ecosystem. The connection from producers to end users to all intermediaries. And we mentioned the need of knowledge, and we've heard that one training is not enough. We need lifelong learning on how we can use these new technologies. This was the core of our discussion. Next step discussed the protection of privacy online and GDPR. And here we mentioned the thought that the introduction of GDPR will probably be ignored by the users. End users will not feel affected. However, it is probable that the introduction of GDPR in EU initially will have beneficial effects in raising the awareness in global scale how important these questions are, and will have global impact on protection of privacy and private data. Since individuals are not aware of importance of protection of privacy, we mentioned that people should know what their rights are, rights of privacy and protection of private data. Then we heard a little more about the protection against excessive demands of the state, of governments, to their data, and the main question was how to protect against these excessive appetites from the states so that they would not have access and insight into our privacy. The problem is that citizens are not interested in these issues as long as they are not affected personally. So how can we oppose the state? We got an interesting idea, interesting proposal that we have to talk about these appeals or initiatives from the state. We have to organize, discuss, and raise the awareness in public, publicly discuss these issues. And to be concluded with the futuristic question: which technologies based on big data will importantly shape our everyday lives in the future? Two technologies were mentioned here. First, artificial intelligence, AI, and secondly, the audio recognition, voice recognition devices will play an important role. And that was it from the third section. Dusan, the floor is yours now. Let me thank you all for your participation, great discussion, great panels, and we did our best to initiate good discussion, exchange of opinions. These conclusions will be part of our final report and sent out to international partners, international forum, presented at the International Forum on the Management of Internet. we are planning next meeting next year. We will make this forum annual event. And what is important for me is if I use Solima, I will ask Solima to present, and perhaps Andrea, to present next steps, our next steps. If we may, yes?
I missed the last part of what you said, so I'm not so sure what I'm supposed to do.
Yes. We are now supposed to describe the next steps.
Okay, thank
So,
you.
from SloIGF to CD.
Thanks, Rishan.
So the floor is yours.
First, hello everyone, I'm Soina Delano. I work with Diplo Foundation, but I'm now speaking on behalf of CD, which is the Southeastern European Dialogue on Internet Governance. Before I do what Dusan asked me to do, let me ask you a question. How many of you know what CD is or have heard about it before this meeting? 1, 2, 3. Okay. Yeah, not true. So maybe I should start with a brief intro about CD, right?
Yes.
I'll try to be as brief as possible, and I have a slide showing some numbers, if someone can boost those up. Yeah, can you go over this? There's a single presentation there, and one slide. So CIVIC, Southeastern European Dialogue on Internet Governance, is an IGF initiative for what we call Southeastern Europe and the neighboring area. Now, don't ask me which are the countries because I don't have a list of countries. It is a flexible concept, as Jan says, so whoever feels part of this extended region, they are welcome to join. We had 3 meetings. Our first meeting was in 2015. Our third meeting was this year in Macedonia in May. And now, right now, at your Slovenian IGF, we are starting planning the next meeting, which will be held, and thank you for this, in Slovenia next year, probably in May. So the 4th annual meeting of CIVIC will be held here. And what does it mean? It means that the regional community, the internet community, will come together and discuss about issues that are important for them as a regional community. So things that you have discussed here might be of interest for the broader community, or they might have some other issues as well. Now, we can show only this, and I'll talk a bit about what it means. So this is CIVIC in numbers. We have used this as our meeting earlier this year, and we think this shows better what CIVIC is and how it has grown over the past 3 years. I have told you already that we had 3 annual meetings, but CIVIC is a bit more than just an annual meeting. So we don't just bring the community together once every year. We have what we call intersessional activities. And one of those intersessional activities is a thing you might have found in your tote bags. We call it the monthly summary of developments, internet-related developments in our region. So what we do, we have a team of editors, and every month they look around the region what happens in terms of internet governance, ICT-related policies, things like that, good and bad alike. And we publish them at the end of each month. We hope this helps strengthen the community, sharing good or bad practices and learning from each other, basically. So that's one part of our intersessional activities. And the second one is the Southeastern European Hub. You see it there with a 10 on it. Every month we also meet online and discuss these developments. It's a simple Adobe or WebEx meeting. People from around the region come together and discuss some of the developments which are in the summary, but also sharing a bit more of what's happening in their country. So we also meet in these monthly meetings. What else? The number of summaries we have published so far, it's 11. Everything is or should soon be available on our website, which is civic.net. We had some, security issues, but it should be back alive soon and you can find everything there. We have a quite impressive number of supporting organizations. You see a 16 there. We have ICANN as one of our supporting organizations, the Internet Society, Frederic was here. Others, the European Commission, the Council of Europe, and other regional and international internet-related organizations, the Global IGF, Eurodic, RIVE, and so on. What else? We do attend meetings of national IGF initiatives, as we are doing this now, but we also meet online with the national IGF initiatives from time to time to talk about challenges, opportunities, exchange ideas, and get to improve each other, learning from each other. We do surveys as well. We did a survey last year on internet governance, how it is perceived in the region. The results are online. It's quite impressive to see how the community community in our region actually sees internet governance. Some results are funny, so I kindly invite you to go and see them. And we did another survey this year on IDNs. Now, you know what IDNs are, right? I don't have to do this, please. Internationalized domain names. So that's what we also did this year because we had a session on it in Ohrid in Macedonia. And in short, that's basically CIDIC. So CIDIC is an IGF initiative for Southeastern Europe and neighboring area. It has an annual meeting, but it also has intersessional activities. In terms of also planning the next year meeting, we have an open call for topics. So when we say that we plan the meeting, it's not me and Sasha, my colleagues, and some other colleagues in the core team, which we call executive committee planning the meeting, but it is the community. So we have an open call for issues, which has been opened, I think, a couple of weeks ago, and will stay open until the end of December. So you have 2 months to think about issues that you would like us to discuss here in Slovenia next year. Everything internet related. And when we say we ask for issues, we don't ask for an elaborated proposal, 2 pages of, I don't know, things, just a simple sentence saying, I want to talk about privacy and security, right, the last session. Put that online and we will put things together, and then based on how many proposals on a specific topic we get, we will be organizing sessions. And actually it will be you, the community, organizing them, because again, it is not only us putting things together. So in short, this is it about CIDIC. I really hope to see you all next year at our meeting. But meanwhile, try to get engaged with our community as well, building from your national IGF, congratulations for it now, and going a bit higher to the Southeastern European Dialogue on Internet Governance and Euroleague and the Global IGF, as Dusan has already said. And with this, if you have any questions about our work, I would be glad to answer them. I think I have spoken a bit too much and too fast, so please. No?
So let me thank again all the participants and the team that helped organize this meeting today. The organizing board, both sponsors, and now let me invite you all outside to continue our discussion and talk about next meetings, our next actions, next operations. Andrea, you wanted?
So, as ICANN, we do support CIDIC. We're one of the sponsor organizations. We provide funds, we provide some expertise, but we don't provide content. We don't provide any direction on what should be discussed. And in my view, CIDIC goes back to what I was saying at the end of the panel. It is really a remarkable, unique example of innovating governance. So far, and I speak about so far because we have to be bold and dare, as Steve Jobs used to say. So far it's only a discussion forum. This is a place where everybody can come and share their own views, experiences, ideas. But I think that the way this discussion forum can evolve, it actually can become a place where policies can be then, hopefully one day, designed in a way that really respects and reflects how the internet works. And I'm Italian. I was raised and born in Italy, and every time I come to this part of Europe, and I'm based in Brussels and I travel mostly in Southern Europe, but I always feel that there is something happening here that I don't see anywhere else. There is this sense of feeling of a community that goes beyond borders. Although you have some sad history about borders, but still there is a sense of a community, and there is this extremely thoughtful analysis. I could see that on the panels. There is a young base of internet users, and there is a push for innovation. I see all the elements here coming around for bringing it to the next level. And that's why I personally support and convince ICANN to support CIDIC, but also when I compare it with other discussion, other events that I see in other parts of the world, I see that there is plenty of potential here. It's an event that actually doesn't belong to a single country. It doesn't belong, to a single stakeholder group. It's like the internet. It belongs to everybody that shares and wants to contribute to that. It's defined by a region, that it's a very open definition of the region. And that's something that you don't see. I mean, look what's going on in Spain. Actually, we are seeing countries that go back into this fight. Okay, this is my region, this is my neighbor, and I don't want to be with you. Actually, CIDIC is going beyond that. I think that could soon be something that students and experts in governance and public policy will look into that. But it does need your support, and as of now, we have a community which is a core community of probably a couple of hundred people, which is spread across the whole region. But I see the potential to become way larger than that, and to set the stage for something that we haven't been able to see elsewhere, not even at the global level. If you look how the Global Internet Governance Forum, which is now 11 years old, was able to move and to grow, well, actually you can really challenge whether it moved and it grew. It remained, for several different reasons, something that is still hosted by a small secretariat within the UN system, and the rest of the UN agencies, they make sure that it doesn't grow too much. You don't have these things here. You have really something in your hands that few people really can even fathom. And I really invite to look at the website. There will be also soon a launch for an election of members of the executive committee, and that's something that you don't see elsewhere. It's completely open and bottom up, so if you want to be personally involved into that, you can just apply and be in the steering part of that. Always being clear that, well, you represent a community, so the community will help you in the work. I always speak about community. It makes me laugh because in Italian, when you say, go to the community, it's usually either you are an alcoholist or a drug addicted, and so you go to this place. So I hope it doesn't translate this way in Slovenian, but it's really the sense of a community that goes across the internet, that goes across different stakeholder groups from a region that knows a lot about dealing with boundaries, dealing with borders, and dealing with new challenges and opportunities from the internet. And I hope that next year we'll have problems in finding a venue for the next CIDIC, because there will be so many people wanting to participate. So joining, have a look at the website, sign up to the mailing list, and make it yours. And you have something truly remarkable. You will see that. Thank you.
Yes, another thing very key. Let me thank to the chairman of the administrative board. Why we invited him, but there is a long story behind, but it is important that the president recognizes the importance of this process, honoring us with the presence that CIDIC is part of, that the Slovenia is becoming part of the wider story, together with the Slovenian board, that we managed to organize and prepare this event. The idea was to connect it to the presidency of Slovenia, to the process of cooperation within the Europe. The Slovenia is presiding from June this year and next year, that we will have Europe CIDIC in May. It would be great if we could organize it in April, then we would be able to connect the whole story. Now, Andrea is part of the story, and he is one creating the story. It is important to make this story wider, make it regional. So again, let me invite you all to CIDIV and to continue the discussion, continue our work, perhaps less formally outside. Thank you all. Thank you, Andrea. And finally, let me thank our interpreter, technical team, for their support and their work. Thank you.